It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. And we're back once again. Hello, everybody. Why don't you say hello and introduce yourselves so we know what you sound like?
Hi, I'm Els Tahura.
Hi, I'm Chad Jetner.
Hello, I'm Peter Lawrence.
And I'm Kyle Bacher, and today we're going to talk about the dreaded imposter syndrome. So, did anybody look it up in the Webster's Dictionary to define what is imposter syndrome?
I'm sure
Pretty
Peter
sure
did.
Peter did, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Peter, what's imposter syndrome?
The 1 week I failed to do my homework and I get called out on it. This is terrible. No, I didn't look it up. I'm just, what's imposter syndrome?
All right. It's when, should I answer? Chad,
Yes, go for it.
You started, Chad. So
Well, no, I was going to say, I mean, Peter, if you have imposter syndrome that you don't think we think you're a nerd, you shouldn't, because me and Al both said, Peter probably looked it up.
I know.
Yeah. It's simply feeling like an imposter, like you're going to be found out, like you're really not qualified to be there. You can't do the job. You don't have a seat at the table. You don't belong.
And it's a, thank you, Internet, an internal experience of believing you are not as competent as others perceive you to be, as if you are a fraud.
Yes.
See also consultant.
Okay, you opened that door though, Peter. So why see also consultant?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's fairly, you walk into a new organization as part of your job. I mean, I've had more jobs as a consultant than I've had in my career, right? And more gigs is what I call them. But you walk in and you're being brought in on purpose, and generally, everybody's like, oh, high-paid consultant. We've talked about the special badge or the special things, and you have to come in and you have to own it, right? You have to be in charge of being the consultant or the consulting team, or however you want to phrase that. And people look to you for the answer. And sometimes you have it, and many times you don't have the whole answer, but you have a part of it. So you gotta represent the fact that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and that's something that comes up all the time, either when we're interviewing new candidates to join SDG, or if we're interviewing at future potential client placement opportunities, that the fun part of consulting, or one of the fun parts of consulting, is that you get a lot of variety in your day-to-day work. You get to see how different companies answer the same problem in different ways. You get to play with a lot of different technology. But one of the drawbacks of that maybe, at least I know when I started doing consulting, didn't occur to me. And so it's something that I try to talk about when I'm interviewing other folks, is that you are onboarding at a new job fairly frequently, essentially. Every time you're changing clients, you're starting a new job in essence. And so if you have imposter syndrome, or you're just feeling like, they expect me to know everything, I don't know everything, why do they think I'm an expert at, am I going to be able to help them? You have to kind of be prepared for that feeling to come up fairly frequently.
Right.
If not
Absolutely.
daily.
Yeah, fair. Yeah.
I have told younger folks, I'm also a part-time recruiter now, that one of the benefits of consulting, like El just said, is you see a lot of different customers, you see a lot of different clients, usually in the Twin Cities metro area. We're a local company, and that's great. That's really great if you're really good, and we have a pretty good track record of pulling in people that are really good, because not only is it good for you to learn all these different skill sets, 100 different ways to do kind of the same, 100 different ways to solve the same problem, and just get exposure, but also it's good for your career, right? Like, even if consulting doesn't end up being your thing, you still get exposure to lots of different places locally, and you let those people know, yeah, I'm pretty good at what I do. And once you've been a consultant for a few years, you don't really have to worry about a gig anymore, at least in this market, right? If you're good. You should be terrified if you're not, but that's
That'll be a different podcast episode.
That'll
You
be
just
different.
gave you just gave a bunch of people imposter syndrome.
That's right.
Yeah, I could have.
That's the long string of 2-week gigs that last for your career, right? Is
Mhm.
I can fool them for
Yeah.
2 weeks and then they find out.
Yeah,
And that's a fear of all of us, right? Like I'm going to be here for 2-3 weeks and then they're going to find out that I'm not the expert in everything under the sun. I'm not able to answer all questions without using the word Google, or anything else like that, right?
But Chad, you mentioned every day. So if you're experiencing, or if one were to experience, imposter syndrome at breakfast every day, like how are there things that you do to make that more tolerable or to not paralyze you when you start working?
I mean, it's well, we talk about it as if it's a negative. And it's not, it can be
Totally
a
fair.
positive, right? Like
Yep.
the feeling of inadequacy there is just kind of drives me to be mildly more vigilant about what I do. If you would ask my wife, maybe a little too much for focused on my day to day, but it's I do kind of feel that damn near every morning before I log into work. So it actually kind of helps me in a way, motivates me to make sure that I'm not necessarily lacking in any specific skill set. It motivates me to stay on top of a lot of things, the business requirements, the business needs, the people that can make things happen for our team, all of that. So it's not, I mean, yes, I do feel that all the time, and it does get stressful occasionally, if not frequently. But it also motivates me to actually just prove it all the time.
It's far better than overconfidence. Like, I got this, that's the pride goeth before the fall. That's not a motivator to scramble to learn and fill your knowledge gaps and become what you think you need to be. That is not an imposter. But yeah, that drive to scramble to figure stuff out and stay on top of things. Um, like there is something to be said for trying to prove yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's almost a crisis of confidence, but the answer isn't more confidence. It's kind of humility and, expectations and communication. Like once you get going, it kind of melts away. So sometimes the answer is just get down to work, and charge ahead. Not every day you're going to knock out of the park, but as consultants, I think, you look at, well, I only do this. I'm only really good at this. This is what I really want to do. And we're really good at like figuring out this as well, like on the fly. We can adapt and scrambled. I think the best way I've ever heard it explained was if you hire a lawyer that only does DUI cases to represent you for a different type of case, they're still a lawyer. Like that's just natural that, yeah, they're going to have to brush up on that law and figure that out. But that's part of the game. It doesn't mean that they're a bad lawyer. It doesn't mean you're a bad consultant if you don't know everything. It's the ability to stretch.
Fun fact, according to Wikipedia, which is never wrong, there are notable individuals that have felt imposter syndrome, including Michelle Obama, Maya Angelou, Chuck Lorre, Tom Hanks. Like these are the company you're keeping with imposter syndrome. So it's actually pretty good company.
Chuck Lorre was the producer of 2.5 Men and some other shows, I think.
Yeah, lots of really, I mean, maybe in Chuck's case, because those are all horrible shows, but
but what you're saying is that it doesn't just hit, you know, people that are poor at their jobs, right? It hits some of the top of the heap folks at different points in their life, right?
Yes, and Chuck Lorre.
And Chuck Lorre. You know, the other thing that I've found that helps imposter syndrome for myself personally is having years and years and years and years of experience. That tends to, as you get longer in your career, you tend to get a little bit less because you've seen a lot more things, right?
Yeah.
Especially, you know, consulting for 15 plus years, 20 years, you've seen a lot of different ways to do the same thing.
Well, and how many times is there a problem to be solved that has to be solved by a single person who needs to know the answer off the top of their head? Like the expectations of, I need to know everything, I need to be able to do everything at the drop of a hat. That almost never happens. And so I think also over time you start to see like, yeah, I don't need to have this vast encyclopedia of rote memorized information, because like so much of our work and our lives is dependent on other people, you know, like working as a team or being able to look up information and do additional research. I think it's just recognizing that the standard that you're putting yourself up against when you're suffering or under the umbrella of imposter syndrome, like that's just not, it's almost never going to show up in real life, that expectation.
Yeah.
We have
I told a younger kid that we all turn into horrible developers when Stack Overflow goes down.
Yeah.
So you don't worry about memorizing every single library, every single method, every single whatever. Figure out patterns, get those down, you'll be fine. And then figure out how to talk to people. Like, that's it.
I had a very similar conversation, Chad, as you, with an intern at my client last week, where they were just asking, okay, what languages do I need to know, and what do I need to study in college, and how do I make sure that I follow all the right steps? And I just kept trying to remind them, like, do what seems fun, do what seems smart in the moment. But I think, Chad, to your point, if you learn the basics, if you know design patterns, or if you understand how to communicate with other people or make an argument, you're good. Like, non-linearity is much more the rule of life than the exception.
Yeah, I almost never develop in C anymore because, you know, like I learned back in the glory days of school. It's like, well, that was a great learning experience, but don't need it anymore.
Concerned about the almost qualifier that you used for that, Peter.
There still exists a large library of code out in the world that was written in that language, and sometimes you have to read it and use it.
And sometimes Peter might get nostalgic for it too, you know.
No, that never happens.
Oh, okay, all right.
So how do you get out of it? How do you like overcome it? And so you got this daily like feeling you don't measure up. They're going to find you out. I used to get it at the beginning of every project. Like I called my, manager. I'd be like, I just don't think that it's going to work out. Like nothing bad happened. It's just that feeling walking in as you're learning what they really want you to do, what the project really is. And then, but when you overcome that and you figure things out and you are successful, it's all the more like exciting, like that you were able to do that, and that can carry forward, gives you a little bit of momentum. But I found like what are my expectations of the people I'm going to be working with? Like when I went to do a project for an engineering firm, that was really intimidating. Like these are smart people that know that things can be done. And I'm a configurator of a system that has like boundaries and limitations. And that was that was a challenge. But um, you do get, it does get easier to handle. It might not go away completely, but what I found is learning to lean on other people, learning that I don't have to know everything, learning not to uh, think that I can read people's minds. Like I know what their expectations are of me, and they're extremely high. Um, yeah, and then this thing we do where we elevate people, where you put people on pedestals, and um, you walk in a room full of people and you start figuring out where you fit in the hierarchy of whatever, like whatever the ruler is that you're imagining that doesn't really exist. Um, I think that if you learn to just kind of see yourself as um, just another person in the biz on the team, and everybody's a peer, everybody's an individual, um, and then we got a ton of people here to lean on. Like there are people ready to drop everything to help out, to provide answers.
That always helps.
So having a support system, I think, is also helpful in dealing with that. So what do you do? Elle, your specializations
Mhm.
are pretty broad. Like there's a lot of ways to approach what you do.
Sure.
So you're going to get a project that you may never have done before.
That never happens. Except for every other day.
Not just databases.
How do you deal with that?
I err on the side of over communication, over documentation, over kind of basically externalizing things. So if I have a project I haven't worked on before and I feel like I am really not qualified to do, I can't do this. Why on earth did they bring me in? I That's where I lean on the fact that I'm a consultant and part of our job is to be professional question askers. So I can ask a lot of questions from detailed to very, very basic and dumb. Just to like, okay, how can I start to understand my scope? How do I draw on experience I've had in the past to understand where I am now and where I actually have gaps? Because you say there's a lot of variety, but SQL as a language has been around for what, 60 years, 50, 60 years.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, like I won't need to relearn SQL. So if I can, like, okay, it's a database, I know I can query it. It might be a slightly different formatted database, or I might need to get a new IDE, or there might be a particular schema pattern we're following that's a little bit unusual. So I try to figure out, of this giant pile of work that I don't know, which parts do I actually know? How can I break that down into bits that draw on my previous experience, and which parts that are really truly new to me? Then I get to start friendly interrogating other people on my team. Tell me how this works. Tell me why you made this decision. Tell me why we're using this particular technology. And that starts to build up a lot of knowledge, and I'm writing that down and I'm documenting that as I'm going so that I have some reference. But aside from just building up little bits of information, one of the things that I've found really, really valuable is to kind of have a way of stepping outside of myself. So thinking about if I was bringing in another consultant on my team, or if I was in charge of onboarding a new team member, what is the expectations that I would have of them in terms of what they need to be able to do, what they need to be able to know. And I'm generally a lot kinder to this imaginary new person than I am to myself, just in terms of here's the level of expectations that I have. And so I try to fall back on what I would expect from other people as a measure of, okay, how should I act? What do I really need to do in order to do a good job? Because a perfect job isn't possible. So yeah, that's kind of the general pattern I follow. I don't know if that's consistent, Kyle, with how
Well,
you.
I think the theme is it's humility is counterintuitive, because you think that, if you're going in, you're asking a lot of questions, you're taking an interest, and you're not afraid of people, like, because you asked a question thinking that you don't know something, and that means that you're not an expert and you're the wrong person for the job. But it really shows you're taking an interest, you're being thorough, you care. um, I'm always worried about the person that doesn't ask questions,
Yeah.
that doesn't seem interested, that so to kind of go in that way and go, okay, I'm gonna listen, I'm gonna do a lot of listening, I'm gonna learn about, like, not just what I know or need to know, but what's the kind of collective knowledge of my team, and where are the gaps, and how do we fill them? Okay, now I got to learn these things. I've been a lead on a few projects, and it was, there was gaps, there were skill gaps, and so I filled them. Um, I scrambled and learned how to do it, and then we got it done. Um, and I think it's the same way when you're a consultant going into a project, is like, where do I have to kind of plug in here, and what can I lean on other people for? And then kind of trust others to fill that role. So it's, that's kind of driven by that imposter syndrome. It's driving you to take that approach.
But
Whereas
even there are cases, I just want to jump in quick, because there are even cases where, if you have somebody coming in who is asking a lot of questions, who is embracing that humility and just sort of like, okay, and maybe has imposter syndrome and wants to be able to move forward instead of being paralyzed. Even just the asking questions of other people can then help those other people if they don't feel like if they have imposter syndrome as well. Like, having that open communication and information exchange can kind of be mutually beneficial, because then everybody gets a better sense of, oh, I actually do know these things, and here's where I do have strengths.
I always felt really good when there was something I didn't know and I was struggling with, and I reached out to a bunch of people and they didn't know either.
Yes.
And it was like reassuring. It's like, okay, I'm not the only one. And then I go find out and figure it out. And then I send an email to the team. Okay, here's how you do it. I figured it out, because I had time to do it, and kind of the pressure was on me to figure it out. So, but then you educate other people as well. But that's that kind of isolated, alone feeling that really drives imposter syndrome. Like, I'm different than everybody else. They're all better than me.
Yeah, it's never imposters plural syndrome.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true. I want to drive back a little bit to the point that you were making about, not asking people coming in and not asking questions, or people coming in with preformed who obviously don't have imposter syndrome, right? They come in, they know exactly what they want, and this square peg will fit into this round hole no matter what, and I'm going to make it happen because I know square pegs. And that's all I know, and I know it really well, and we're going to make it work here. It's like, well, sometimes it's better to have a little bit of imposter syndrome to allow yourself to say, well, maybe this solution that I'm thinking of isn't the right answer, right? And I'm not forcing it down there, and I'm asking questions as opposed to, prescribing things or telling folks that. And the other scary person is the person that doesn't ask questions, goes off into a corner and does stuff completely wrong, right? Like comes
Yeah.
back, here's my answer. Nope. Try again.
Yeah.
Like if you would have asked 14 hours ago, we could have told you that you were on the wrong track.
Yeah, I'd much rather answer a dozen stupid questions or questions than have to come back to a problem a week later and untangle a
Right.
lot of nonsense. Yeah.
Right. Or throw away, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
well, that was a great effort. We're going to throw that away and start over because you've done such a unusual job of coding this.
Which can be a
Yeah.
good exercise, like to think about, okay, I coming in, I don't deserve to be here, so I'm going to go guess what needs to be done and hopefully no one will notice. If you take a step back and think about what's the worst thing that could happen if
Right.
I ask questions, if I try to acknowledge and be upfront about here or where my gaps are, that worst case scenario is going to be nothing near as bad as I went off on my own. I wasted a bunch of time. I wasted a bunch of money, and I came back with something that wasn't what they wanted in the first place. So now they know I'm a fraud and I've done the wrong thing. That's far worse.
And I've been there early on where I took on something that I shouldn't have.
Mm.
It's like this is so like out of the realm of what I do and what I'm just going to learn this on the fly. There's always learning you do as you go along, but like all of a sudden I have to write custom JavaScript code, having never done it, having not being a developer, writing code, doing any of that. And then I spent, like 3 days doing something before I needed help. And then I asked for help from somebody that did know it. And they did it in like an hour. And then with my head hung low, I had
You
to,
learned a valuable lesson.
here's what I did. Like, yeah. Cause it's like I made a mistake. Like I should not have taken that on. And there's been, projects that have come through and looking at what they want done. It's like, yeah, that's gonna be too much of a stretch to take on. Like that's not within my skill set. I'm not a .NET developer. So
Well,
it's
and
really not going to be a good fit.
right. And sometimes you have to have that failure in order to recognize. But there are also times where you have success doing that same thing, right? Where it does come through and you get a little hero cape on the back because it actually worked out. But
I think what I've done when I'm asked to do something that is well outside of my expertise, is, hey, this is well outside my expertise. Are you sure you want me doing this? Because I'm going to it's going to take longer than if we get someone in that, specializes in infrastructure and security and that kind of server side stuff.
right.
That's not even an actual example, but it's that sort of thing. Like, and then it's, well, you're kind of the only one we got. So go for
Wing it. Wing
Yeah.
it, right?
Here's what makes it a little worse sometimes for me is that it's not just like the skill set and the client and everything else. It's us, right? Like it's SDG. So I know that
Sure.
it's not just, am I qualified to be here at this customer solving this problem, right? That's one part of it. But you're also paired with some of the smartest people that you've ever worked with being part of SDG.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so
I appreciate
there's
that.
a different shade of it here than there is at other places, right? Like if I was at, I won't name a consultancy, I would feel less what I do now compared to, with amongst my peers. I'd feel less imposter syndrome than I do now, but knowing that I'm being paired with literally some of the smartest people that I've ever worked with, it's kind of a nice problem to have because you're working with incredibly talented, smart people. But at the same time, like this feeling sinks in sometimes even more so. Like, working with Greg and Leif and whoever else, those guys are just ridiculously smart. And also there's me. So that,
Well, and
yeah,
the funny thing is that they have those days too, right? I'm working with incredibly smart people from STG, and it's not me. I'm at the bottom of the incredibly smart pool, and everybody else is doing amazing things, right?
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
everybody
I
has
was
those times.
so intimidating when I started. Just, hearing about the projects and the places, the customers, and just the way people interacted and the topics for the presentations we would do and like just brilliant people. And I'm like, I really don't belong here. Like maybe I should go back to waiting tables because I don't think I'm going to make it. You have all those feelings, but you just have to like keep pushing and moving forward. And then you learn that, well, actually, this is a good thing because I have people to lean on and ask questions of and that have more experience. But I thought it was all up to me when I started. I thought I was a hired gun and I had to go out and get her done by myself. And it took me a while to become more of a team player. And I'm still working on it.
And yeah, I think I had similar. Yeah, I had very similar feelings as well. Just when I started at SDG, and just wow, this is a bunch of brilliant people. And granted, I wanted to work for SDG, and so it was like, dang it, I got my wish, and now I'm surrounded, and I don't know why they hired me. And so there was a period of time where I just was sort of like, well, they're going to find out that they made a mistake in hiring me, but until they do, at least I'm going to get time to get inspired by other people,
Well, and the other
That's
part
one
of that
where,
too,
like, yeah.
as far as coping mechanisms go for that, like this is kind of why I constantly push for happy hours or events or whatever, so that I can hear these other folks that I have a lot of respect for talk about their problems, and in my head hear, oh yeah, that's kind of what we're doing, and he solved it just like I solved it, right? Like that stuff comes out at a happy hour frequently. So if you're going through this, like one of the best ways to get through it is talk to other people that are doing what you're doing, and don't even talk to them from a position of like, yeah, I don't think I should be here. Just listen to their problems.
Yeah.
And you'll probably find out that the way you solved them, the way you tackled them line up perfectly to what, your peers are doing. And also you're drinking beer. So why it's added bonus.
It's win-win, right?
You can find mentors without actually officially like making, that mentor thing, like writing it, that letting the mentor know they're your mentor. You just build relationships. I've called Peter the voice of reason for years. because I would reach out to him, and because he's skeptical but not cynical.
Thought it was the other way around.
There's only a few things you're cynical about, but mostly you're like, well, are we really going to do that? Is that really going to get done? Should we really make this kind of like, I'm like, yeah, you're right. Okay, thank you. But I came in kind of humble in our first interview, or my tech interview with Peter. I'm like, I'm not doing that clock problem. I'm not a developer. Don't even ask. What's the clock problem, Peter?
Well, a clock problem is just a simple little mathematical determine the angles of a analog clock given a time of day, and just write a function to do that. And it's just something that helps me see how someone processes things.
I'm really confused. You lost me at math.
It's a small little problem that can be solved in a couple of minutes or less, and it just helps you see somebody's thinking process and problem solving skills. Asking questions about why, what am I doing, how do I solve this, what do I know, what don't I know, and it's just kind of a little icing on the cake of interview for me.
I'm sorry I took that away from you. So
no, I didn't need it.
Chad, does the pressure, like the weight of a project, the number of team members, like how critical it is to the organization, being a lead, like, is that all just piling on your morning imposter syndrome breakfast? Just the sheer amount that's on the line riding on your shoulders?
I mean, it wasn't.
Like, wow, we needed some like mournful backing music with that.
Sorry.
Dun dun dun.
I mean, it's not all me, right? I have a co-lead that I can rely on, that I do rely on. I have smart people that I'm working with that make me feel better about getting to a solution. But yeah, I mean, all of it, right? It does add to the amount of pressure. So, what's that?
Go ahead and finish, Chad. Sorry.
I was going to say, I mean, once you have this imposter syndrome, once you have that feeling, the amount of pressure that goes against it you don't have more imposter syndrome. It's a given quantity. But the propensity, like the consequences of living up to imposter syndrome are much worse in certain situations. If that makes sense, right? Like, if I'm right and I really am not the right guy for this, the consequences of that are horrible for lots of people.
Yeah, being right about imposter syndrome is probably the worst case scenario, right?
Exactly. And it's
and that's kind of the fail fast. But it's not fail, it's just recognizing the fit is wrong.
We do a lot of things at our company, and I think I kind of toot our own horn a little too much, but SDG does a nice job of giving us ways internally to make people feel better about what they're doing, right? Like our little high five awards, getting those frequently helps. Getting, our quarterly recognition emails, getting those help. We have consultant managers that help a lot. Our account managers reinforce, a lot of like positive feedback from everybody. So SDG itself does a really, really great job of helping us manage that internally, especially for, guys that are in, whatever role, that have a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. There's lots of mechanisms that we put in place that help that. But being amongst our peer group, I'm not going to say it offsets the benefit, but like you are measured against truly great people. And so whatever good we do, it's just not going to be, it's not ever going to go away. I cope with it by hanging out with peers, being around those guys constantly, over communicating, like Elle said, and other things.
I think another thing that we haven't talked about that I will try to do as well is to, when other people are in their element and they're showing off what they can do and it's awesome, choosing to be inspired by that and using that as a motivator as opposed to a nice little hammer that I can use against myself. Because it can be easy to fall into that, like, oh, they're doing so much, I need to, now this is apparently a competition. Like, it doesn't, no, it doesn't need to be. Like, it's a way of seeing and celebrating other people thriving that can be really exciting to try and apply that to yourself. Like, how can I, like, what are things that I can do to feel like that or to project that energy when talking about it to other people?
I think that that concept of, if you're great, I'm horrible,
Yep.
Is
Not
poison.
true.
It's
Yes.
poison in the veins. It's it's the measuring.
Mhm.
Like, stop measuring.
Yeah.
Stop, like, placing people above or below, or reading their minds, figuring out what their expectations are, even though you don't know. Like, no, just, most people are really nice and helpful, and the people that we work with are good people. If you don't know something, they get excited that they can help you. I love connecting with new people, and helping them out, like, because that was so valuable for me. So it's like kind of paying it back.
Mm.
So if you put a question out in your practice channel, there's a race going on behind the scenes of people, like, scrambling for an answer to give you, that want to help you.
Yeah.
I honestly can't think of a single Slack question in any of the channels that has gone, more than a day without a reply, or several, right? Somebody's always out there, even just somebody posting a picture of their dog, right? Somebody's out there responding to that picture, and they're there listening.
If you want to find a good plumber, you're going to find 10 good plumbers.
It's true. And
Yeah.
it's a great connection to have with people, is not plumbing necessarily, but just the, knowing that you can ask any question, including who's a great plumber, and that somebody will spring forward to help you out, and probably 10 people will be like, oh, well, I've used so and so, and this is the experience, or
Mm-hmm.
It's just an amazing feeling.
Did Peter freeze a bit for you guys?
He did freeze a bit.
Sorry, I'm on Wi-Fi a little bit.
You can post a message on Slack and ask why that happens all the time, Peter. All right. Have we sufficiently sang SDG's praises? We could keep going.
I think so.
It's hard not to. I mean,
I tell you though, it hasn't been just SDG either. Like, I've had a lot of customers that have had, good people, most of them good, helpful people that, you know, they don't give you demerits for Googling things. You know, it's like Googling in plain sight shouldn't be a sin for a
Oh,
consultant. But I have heard people like, you know, and this wasn't recent. Years ago, I heard someone say they had to look it up. Like, okay, that's not my problem. Do you know how much there is to this stuff? Yeah. And I don't want to store it all in my brain,
Right.
but knowing where to look, knowing things exist that you can dip into later on. You don't have to learn everything from soup to nuts, you know, so that you're not going to know everything, like, because you can't. Um, Getting more as we move to the cloud more and more, accepting change, you know, not getting
Mhm.
so bent out of shape because they moved the button without asking. Like they just do stuff because you're, you know, you're using their stuff, and um, you know, you learn to kind of go, just run with it, learn on the fly. Um, be like water.
Wow.
That's what I meant then.
It's pretty deep. Um, Chad, I know you'd mentioned that one of the things that you do to help out is to stay abreast of everything, right? You read all of the daily comings and goings from the different technology vendors that you're dealing with at the time, and that helps you at least know something exists and know that you can Google it, right?
Yeah. I mean, AWS is the best example. What did you say? They have 300 plus services now?
So I think
Yeah.
so.
And there's specific Twitter accounts I follow, like Jeff Barr on Twitter. He's a AWS development community relations guy. Like he always posts about a new service or, you know, whatever. They've got a newsletter I make sure to read. But really, like, as far as dealing with what we deal with, knowing a thing exists is usually pretty huge. And then to Peter's point earlier, knowing, okay, I've been doing this for decades now. The patterns are pretty much the patterns, right? Knowing that a thing exists and knowing a pattern for making two things work together, you know, it's usually not all that hard. But if you don't know, you don't know, and so you
Right.
can't. You know, you'll solve a problem incorrectly or maybe not even incorrectly, inefficiently if you don't know what your options are.
100%.
So knowing what your options are, you know, making it part of your daily routine to just, I mean, I'm not saying I'm going to go out and write a prototype for every new service that exists in AWS, right?
No.
I do want to know that a thing is out there that potentially solves a problem that I might become aware of. Super helpful.
But there's also the cases where you know something exists that you're probably never ever going to run into again. So like, good to know. Probably never going to need that. I'll just file that away in the almost never category, right?
Yeah, the problem I have is getting over my curmudgeon-y nature when I see something new that I'm like, well, that's dumb. Why are you even doing that? Like that's, you know, I had that with document databases for the longest time. I'm like, well, that's silly. Like I don't,
Right.
you know, until you actually see somebody put together a really nice use case, and then until you see like your preferred frameworks start to implement that in a way that makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, knowing it existed, I was grumpy. I was like, come on now. What are you kids doing?
There's a lot of times, there's a lot of language features like, I'm never going to use that. 2 years later, I always use that feature constantly. This is my favorite, you know, this is my favorite thing. Interfaces are wonderful.
Yeah. But I mean, back to our topic, it helps knowing kind of what your tools are, you know, like all of your tools. Knowing what those are helps me a little bit in the morning realize, yeah, I can solve all the technology problems. And your soft skills help you solve the people problems, hopefully.
And the pizza problems.
And
it
the
is
pizza problem.
like lunchtime.
I do like Googling. I order pizza for the team a lot. And there's a website that helps you. How many people? How hungry are they? Here's how many pizzas to get.
Do they tell you which toppings to get? Or do they steer clear of that?
No, I usually just tend to get all the toppings that my wife won't eat when we order pizza at home. And that's what happens upon the team. It is absolutely not a democracy when it comes to pizza.
I think when you bring it up being curmudgeonly about things, it reminded me. So I love math. I've always loved math. But in school, I would, sorry, Kyle. When I was younger in school, I would get a lot of flack from teachers because I would write the answer and it was the right answer. I wouldn't show any of my work because I thought, here's the right answer. That's the point of the question.
Right.
And had to very reluctantly start to actually show my work. And that's also served me well with imposter syndrome, where if I think I'm a fraud, but my employer hasn't realized that or my team hasn't realized that, how am I going to show my work to prove that I am? Sort of like with the clock problem, like that we talked about with interviews. It's nice if you can get to the right answer, but even if you don't get to the right answer, even if you're going to do it wrong, talk through how you're going to do it wrong.
100%.
And that can already start to dispel this idea that, I'm completely incompetent, because at the very least, maybe I could get partially there. Or if I could get all the way to the answer, cool, but in a real job setting, we might have to recreate that type of problem. And so it helps to show your work. So yeah, help with imposter syndrome. Fine. Prove you're a fraud. Let's go.
I think with our organization, the best way to fight against imposter syndrome is by celebrating your first anniversary, your second anniversary, your third.
Yeah.
Because
totally.
If you don't celebrate an anniversary, well then, if you don't get to celebrate your first anniversary at STG, then you might have been right. Maybe you weren't. That's harsh.
Well, a little bit. It could be.
Yeah.
It could be that you weren't right, or it could be just like this wasn't a good fit, and so you might be. It's not necessarily as extreme as you're a fraud, but just maybe consulting's not a good fit for you, or
in role confusion. I thought it was this. I thought I would be doing this, and I won't be. And I want to do this thing that I love doing, but I can't do it here. I think figuring that stuff out fast is a good thing. My parting thoughts on this whole imposter syndrome thing is people celebrate their wins, but they typically don't celebrate and advertise their losses. And so we give others, as we do that, we're giving others kind of a false sense of reality that, oh, they're a winner. They just win and win and win. And I'm struggling, but guess what? In one way or another, we're all winging it. And that's okay. Parting thoughts? Elle?
prove you're imposter. If you really think you're do it, and that's going to help you be able to see that the reality that any of us are a fraud is an illusion.
I was going to say, fake it till you make it is a saying, and sometimes it's reality, and that's okay, right?
Yep.
It's all right to fake it a little bit until you've got it all there.
100%.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily need to buy into the negative connotations with imposter syndrome, right? Like you could kind of embrace it a little bit, and it might actually help you.
I think with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.